is also a college entrance exam, and most colleges will accept either the ACT or the SAT. There are very few who will accept only one or the other. Typically, students perform equally on the ACT or the SAT, but sometimes there is a student who is able to perform better on one or the other. The ACT has a science section on it. Students sometimes report that they feel like the ACT, they're not getting tricked by the test the way they feel when they're taking the SAT one, but they do typically end up performing equally on both the SAT and the ACT. With the SAT-2s, also known as subject tests, your student might not need to take subject tests. It totally depends on the schools to which he or she is applying. They are shorter in length, about an hour each, and they're specific to a subject. So there's a U.S. history subject test or a math level 1 subject test. In order to determine whether or not your student needs to take a subject test, your student should be referencing the college websites to see whether or not those are required. If there's no mention of a subject test, then you don't have to worry about it. But if the school, such as UVA, they strongly recommend that you take 2. Anytime a school strongly recommends anything, it means that they want you to do it. So checking the school websites now is important to do to make sure that you're not missing deadlines. They're on Saturdays the same way that the SAT ones are. And you can take, I believe, up to 3 on one Saturday. We don't recommend that. 2 is probably the most that you want to tackle at a time. But you want to make sure that you've taken care of that. The bottom note is just reminding your students that when you register for the SAT or the ACT or subject tests, you have to list the schools to which you want your scores sent. That is the responsibility of the student. We do not send official score reports directly from the high school. Now you might say, wait, I've seen my student's transcript and his SAT scores are on there. You're absolutely right. It's state law that we have to have an SAT score if we are sent the score from College Board, but that is not considered an official score report. So colleges need to receive those score reports directly from the testing institution. Yes?
Question about that. So are you saying that when the students took the SATs, they wrote down maybe 4 or 5 schools that they wanted the board to be sent to?
Correct.
So if they find a new place that they've discovered, how does the process look like to get those?
It'll cost them $11 per school. So you go back onto College Board or back onto actstudent.org and you list the school and they'll receive the cumulative score report, and it's $11 afterwards. We do have fee waivers, so if your student is eligible for that, please send them our way.
So the resources that we have, it's very easy access to for doing research on colleges available. The first one, if you're really looking for true objective information, collegeboard.org provides a ton of objective information. They will tell you the middle 50% of SATs and ACTs. They'll tell you the middle 50% of your GPA. They'll tell you how many students in their freshman class ranked in each decile from their respective high school classes. So that gives you a way to know how you fit into what the college is asking. The way we describe the seniors is if you lined up every current freshman at a college from the highest GPA at the high school level to the lowest, so again, the top 25%, the bottom 25%, the middle 50%, that's the target. If you're in that window, that means the school is on par with what you're doing academically. If you are below that window, then it means it's probably going to be on the terms of a reach school. A little bit ahead of you. Got some things you're aspiring for, maybe not necessarily a shoe-in for admissions. Whereas if you're ahead of the window, if you're above it, that means it's a little more on the scale of a safety school. Somewhere you feel very confident you could get into, somewhere that you feel like your academics are above what they're asking for their freshmen currently. Some other information, we do have college visits to Monticello. We've already had, I believe, 14 of them in various ways come to the school. We have, I think there's over 35 total over the course of the fall that will come. These are the admissions officers who read the applications. They are well versed in what their school is offering, as well as all the opportunities, resources, education, financial aid, any information that you would like to glean from them. They are available to ask questions. Parents are welcome to come to those, although they are geared for students. We would ask that you, if you came, let the students ask their questions first, and then you come in afterwards and meet with the admissions officer. Those admissions officers are here during the school day, so taking time out of the classroom to come meet. We just ask that seniors meet with their teachers in advance, at least 24 hours, get a sign pass saying it's okay to miss class, and then they come to the meetings. And the way to sign up for that is in P105 in our College and Career Center. School counselors, how many parents, yes?
Because nobody comes. Your son would be the only one there.
When, in the history, historically, when we set them up for either before school or after school, students don't show up.
It's really too bad.
And admissions officers, their time is very finite, and they're very often doing multiple schools in a day or traveling throughout. If they get to a school and there's no one there, the next time that we come up on our radar, they very often think, well,
I know, I can have an email
Great.
person to let them know that they can't make it.
Absolutely. Or,
That's-
and that's great.
that's a
Or-
great one. The other one that brings us to that very last one, visit campuses.
Yeah.
The best thing your child can do for their planning for this decision is to visit the campus. That you want them to see as much of that university as you can, because this is a huge financial, huge educational, huge effort decision. They need to be invested in this. You don't, depending on how the family breaks up the finances, you don't want to take out a several $1,000 loan to go to a school and find out 2 weeks in that your child hated it. And they could have found that in a 1-hour tour on a Saturday back in October of their senior year. You want to be as invested in this as possible, and your child needs to be as invested in this as possible. Their friends will tell them things, they'll hear things from their counselors. Go see the campus. Make a decision, make an informed decision based on what you've seen. We've had many kids come to us the fall of their freshman year of college and say, man, I really wish that, I'm not trying to pick on VCU, but I really wish I knew that VCU didn't really have a campus that spread throughout the city. I really wanted that campus feel. And we're thinking, how did you not know that was the case? Did you not take a tour? Oh no, the first time I saw it was when I moved in. We want your kids to feel as invested and knowledgeable about this. So if you can't meet with the admissions officer when they come here, go to the campus. It's worth it. Students do get 2 excused absences from school as long as they bring in a note from the school documenting that they were there, and then they make up the work that they missed.
If you say that at the college, you can show up.
We suggest calling, because very often, I mean, depending on the school, they might have set times that each tour starts. Maybe you don't have to sign up in advance, but you need to be, at the Welcome Center at 5 after, each hour or whatever. Or maybe they have a special event on a certain Saturday, so we encourage you to check on the websites. I would say also, if the teacher would let him out for 3 minutes to run at the very beginning, introduce himself and say, I'm so sorry, I'm in AP chemistry, so I can't stay, but I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm really interested in your school if there are any materials I could take. You at least, get to meet the person, take some things. They probably still give you a little postcard to fill out your information, return it. So you're still at least getting a chance to meet that person.
Every admissions officer leaves a ton of resources with us that we maintain in the College and Career Center. So if they're also looking for just the most recent publication, the most recent information provided by the school, we do have a document. How many senior parents have met with their students' counselor? All right, good. That's what we were asking. We, as a department, decided a few years ago to take an initiative to meet with every student and their parents to make sure that we were all on the same page for schools that are applying to, deadlines, timelines that they're working with, and then any remaining things they need to follow up with during their senior year. If you haven't set that up, we ask that you contact your student's counselor as soon as possible. We are having those meetings ongoing. I've had 2 today, I've got them all week. Every counselor is trying to be with them as fast as we can, because we are going to start running into deadlines, and we want to make sure everyone's on the same page. We don't want anyone to miss anything because they put it off.
So as students are looking at colleges, they're starting to compile their list. And these are just some of the factors that students are considering when they're looking at schools. Of course, the GPA, course history, and SAT scores, those are things that the student brings to the table as far as their criteria and how likely it might be that they would be admitted to the school. But the bottom 2, intended major and location, are things that that school is bringing to the table. So, students have worked really hard since sometimes 7th and 8th grade on high school courses to be able to have as many options available to them as possible. out those schools just the same way as the schools are checking them out. So we have just a couple of location and intended major. There are so many different factors that students are looking at. Some of the things that sometimes don't pop right out, and the JMU admissions rep referenced something. She said, how many had a successful freshman year? What we call, another term for that is retention rate. So how many of your freshmen returned for their sophomore year? If you find that there's a school and it only has 60% of their freshmen returning for their sophomore year, that's a question I call and ask the admissions office about. Can you speak to this statistic? Why did 40% of your students not return for their sophomore year? Certainly, faculty-to-student ratio is one that's important to many students. Do you want to be one of 500 in a classroom this big, or do you want to be in a group of 15 where you can't hide? Neither one is better than the other. It totally depends on that student's learning style and what's best for them. So these are just a couple of the factors. Using the resources from the previous webpage, or slide, as well as the school-specific pages are great resources to find out about the different factors that are important to students. Oh, and one that's often a factor that students reference, and parents, of course, is cost, right? And the thing about the cost of attendance is that you really aren't going to know what the actual cost of attendance is at this point in the process. You're going to see a sticker price, but the sticker price is rarely ever paid by anybody when it comes to colleges. You're not going to find out that actual amount that you're going to have to fork over as a family until in the spring when you get financial aid award letters back, which we'll talk about in a second. But after your family fills out the FAFSA in January, you'll get a financial aid award letter back. And that's when you as a family are sitting down to determine what's the best school for you. The reason I say that is that if there's a dream school that fits perfectly into your student's, the major that he or she wants, the location, the student population, everything, and it seems just perfect, and that sticker price is the only piece that's sticking out, then I would say at this point the only cost is the cost to fill out the application and the time to fill out the application. You're not committing to that school right now. So just something to consider. So when students are applying to schools, we ask as the counselor that they have at least one of each of these schools: the Reach School, Target School, and Safety School. And that's going to refer to the GPA as well as the SAT scores of that student. It is a starting off point to be able to determine Safety, Target, and Reach schools. As the previous presentation showed, there are different criteria and colleges use them in different ways. GPAs are all calculated differently, so it's just a starting off point to determine which schools you likely will gain admittance to, which you might not, and which ones you're pretty sure that you will. We are pleasantly surprised every single winter by a student who gets into a school, and we are really surprised that they got in to that school, because based on their general stats, we wouldn't think so. But we're also really shocked by students who don't get into a school that we thought that they would, and we have no clue why. Sometimes we call it that. So we really hope that your student doesn't take it personally when the school counselor says, okay, but what's your safety school? I don't care if you're ranked first in your class. I want a safety school from you, because if your plan is to go to a four-year school next fall, wonderful. We want you on the campus of a four-year school. With the Dream School or the Reach School, I met with a family, one of my students, a few days ago, and she said, but Ms. Gaskins, I saw your presentation. I don't have a Reach School. Is that horrible? I'm searching. I'm looking for one. Well, her dream school is JMU, which was a target school for her based off of her criteria, but that is where she wants to be next school year. So that's okay. If your student's dream school is one that he or she is most likely going to get into, that's fine. But the reason that we put that up is that I don't want a student to have this dream school that they would love to go to, but they're almost embarrassed. They're saying, well, I'm not applying there because there's no way I'm going to get in. My GPA isn't high enough, or my SAT scores aren't high enough. Because you never know what they might see in your application. You don't need to have 10 dream schools, but certainly if there's one that you think would be a perfect fit for you, we encourage you to apply. And the bottom is important, just to make sure that your student, if your student's best friend says, oh yeah, Virginia Tech, that's my safety school, don't have to worry, that does not mean that that's your student's safety school. So remembering that Safety, Target, and Reach schools are specific to your student's GPA, your student's SAT scores, what your student brings to the table is really important, because we sometimes tend to think that our best friends, it's all kind of the same, that we're all on the same page.
Documents that we have within the school counseling office that pertain to our application, or how we help the students with their applications. First and foremost, the transcript request form. We will not send a document. We won't send a recommendation. We won't contact the admissions officer. We won't send, nothing will come from our office until we get a signed transcript release form from the parent saying that it is okay for us to send that information. Otherwise, we are violating your Federal Education Rights and Privacy Act. So we will not send that information out. If your kid comes in and says, I want you to send it, we haven't gotten a signed transcript, it won't happen. That's something we can get faxed, something we can have emailed to us, something we can have brought in physically, it can be brought in the mail. We cannot release that information until you all give us permission. The next thing, the senior autobiography. This is a chance for students to tell us some of their successes, their failures, their struggles, their goals, things that they see about their educational abilities that would help us to work with them and find the best college. Sometimes we've had kids who will write things like, I really enjoyed being in my AP chemistry class. I thought I was going to hate it because it was going to be really tough, but there was only 9 kids in it, and I found this really personal touch that the teacher offered. And so then that can branch off into a conversation of, all your other classes up to that point have been 25 or bigger. Now you got this class now, and you excelled. You found some inner movement, some way to connect with the material better than you ever had. Maybe that speaks to the type of college you should look for. So that senior autobiography gives us a little insight into the student, helps open up some of those conversations if they haven't already been had. The other thing about it is it helps us sometimes write recommendation letters. Very often we have children who they'll be here from 8:50 to 3:50. They'll be good students. They're athletes. They're participants in all kinds of programs. But we don't really know what they do when they leave campus. And this gives us a little insight into how they live beyond the campus day. The same thing goes with the parent recommendation form. That's a chance for parents to give us a little insight into what they perceive the students' struggles, failures, goals, things that they achieved and accomplished over their high school careers. And a good example of that, 2 years ago I had a student, very, very quiet kid, very academic, but really I never could really account for what he did beyond 3:50. Went home, rode the bus, came back to school the next day with all his homework done, never really knew. And I was reading his parent's recommendation form, and I had already read his, which made no mention of it, but his parent accounted for almost 600 hours of community service. And he thought it was like, well, that's just what I do. That's how I feel like I should live. I need to do that stuff. So I don't really want to bring attention to it. But that to me was a huge piece of his application. And ultimately, that was a huge thing for the admissions office to read about because he was offered some positions once he got to campus as a result of that. So that information, while it may seem small or trivial or like, man, they should already know this about my kid, each of us has roughly 200 students. And I would love to say that I know everything about my 200 students, but I'd be lying to you. And I think any other counselor would say the same thing. So we do our best to get to know our kids, and this is a great way just to account for anything that you think is important for us to know. The activity sheet is a great way to document all the things that your student has done over the 4-year high school span. It includes anything from extracurricular activities, volunteer experience, leadership roles, work experience, awards and honors given to your student. We use those in 2 ways. One, to write the recommendation letter, but also whenever there's a scholarship that we want to talk about a student for, whenever there is an admissions officer who comes to campus and says, tell me a little bit about the kids that you've got who have done their Eagle Scouts because we've got a scholarship that someone donated to our school for that. We can go right to the activity sheets and we have that information very accessible. It also helps us as a school, we track student activity. So it's a great way for us to keep up with that information. Last thing, the 3 teacher recommendation forms. These forms never leave our building. It's a little confusing because there are forms that teachers will write that will go off to colleges. We'll talk about those in a second. But these teacher evaluation, we could call them an evaluation or recommendation. They give us insight into what the student is like in the classroom. We ask the students very often go to a teacher who represents them, who they felt like they were successful in the class, who can speak to their academics, and that teacher fills it out and brings it back to us. Never leaves campus, doesn't go back to the student. Once the student hands it off to the teacher, they're done with it. It comes back to us.
All of these forms are available on our website as well as hard copies in the school counseling office. And once, especially if you have a new counselor that you're working with this school year, we had some changes, and so this becomes even more valuable for us to be able to make sure that we're doing your student justice when we write that paragraph form letter of recommendation about her. So these forms, this is the freak out slide when we're doing the senior visits. So all of those forms are due back to the school counselor counselor 30 school days before the student's first deadline date. This sneaks up on students because they can't count winter break, they can't count holidays, they can't count weekends. So this is where looking at all the schools that the student's applying to and counting 30 school days backwards, then you know that's when all of these forms need to be into the school counseling office. So yes, there's an example. November 1 deadline date, September 19th this week is when all of those forms are due back to the school counselor. And I referenced deadline dates. These are some of the different types of deadline dates that students are working off of. I'll run through them really quickly, but please ask questions if you have any about the different types. So early decision is a binding agreement between your student and the school. They're signing their life away when they fill out that application and send it in. So the advantage, you get to find out early, and if you have that dream school that you would love to go to, that you know that if you get accepted, forget every other school that you apply to, if you have a school like that, then early decision might be the right choice for you. One downside to early decision is that you are committing to a school before you get that financial aid award letter back in the spring. So you're kind of saying, hey, whatever the cost is, we're committing to it. Early action is a lovely option if the school offers it. It means you get to apply early, find out early, but you're not bound to attend. So you still get to wait to get the financial aid award letter back in the spring before making your decision. Unfortunately, not all schools have early action, so that's where your student has to do a little bit of work to determine which are early decision, early action schools. There's also regular decision, which is the easy one. It's usually January 1, January 15th. And then rolling admission is one that's a bit confusing. With rolling admission, schools say beginning November 1 and ending March 1, we're accepting applications. Whenever you turn it in, we'll give you an answer within, 4 weeks maybe? 3 or 4 weeks of getting the application. So students might think, oh, that's the one for me. I'm just going to not have to worry about it. I don't have to get it in until March 1. That's awesome. The thing to remember is that as they go through that rolling admission cycle, the number of seats and their pot of money that they get to offer students is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So we suggest applying as early as possible to a rolling admission school. Your chances are better. Questions about deadlines or types of deadlines? Yes.
So were you saying that the deadline is November 1st, and then we say all those forms have to be in by?
The 19th of September to the school counselor. So the parent recommendation form, the senior autobiography, and the activity sheet are coming from you all. And then the 3 teacher evaluation forms, the student needs to have already handed those out. We need them back from the teachers by the 19th of September. So what I usually suggest is that the student, when they drop off all their forms, they ask me, oh, which teachers have you gotten the evaluation forms back from? And I'll tell them, and then they get to go bug them to make sure that they're turning them in. And the transcript request form, that initial transcript request form is due along with all of those forms 30 school days before the first deadline date. But please note that if a student finds out a new school that they're interested in applying to, we don't need another 30 school days. So if you turn in that batch of forms in the first transcript request form for a November 1 date, and then later in the year, you find out about a school that you'd like to apply to, and they have a January 15th date. So sometime early January, you turn in a second transcript request form, but you don't have to turn all those forms in again, and we don't need the 30 school days because we've already written your letter at that point. So yes, we're going to adapt it a bit for the new school, but we don't need as much time.
All right, this next question about the secondary school report. The vast majority of schools in the state of Virginia have a secondary school report. Some of them call them counselor forms, some of them call them counselor report. What defines it is that it's a lot of objective information that your student shouldn't be worried about keeping up with. Questions like, how does the student's course load compare to the average student in Monticello? What is the size of the graduating class? What is the student's rank, which we don't release rank, we only release decile per county policy.
I'm not sure if internet works in here, but okay.
So this is James Madison Secondary School Report. What you see, the student section fills out the first 3 lines, and then the remainder of it is for the school counselor to fill out. These forms are to be turned into the counselor in advance so that we can complete them when we do the recommendation. Each school, barring, I think, at last count, maybe 6 schools in the state of Virginia, 6 colleges in the state of Virginia. Most of the schools do have it, so there's a very small number that don't. Your student does need to do some research on whether or not these forms are required. When we meet with your student, we will talk about each college application and we'll let them know. I'm expecting a secondary school report from you. You're applying to JMU. I expect to get that. I'm not going to print it off myself. If we don't get these forms and a student had told us, I plan to apply to UVA, but we never got the counselor form, we will assume that the student has changed their mind. We will not track them down. That is on the student's responsibility to find out if the form is required and then get it to us. Once it has been submitted, colleges now have a website that they will be given a username and profile and be able to log into and see if that form has been submitted. So if the student's worried that it hasn't been taken care of, they can log in and see it and they can come talk to us about why it hasn't been submitted. Or if it was already submitted, it just hasn't been processed by the school.
And the processing time, that's a good point. Schools are getting thousands of sheets of paper in. And so if you're checking those online websites to see, okay, have they received all my documentation? If you see that something hasn't shown up yet, a phone call to the admissions office is a good idea. So you're able to say, well, my counselor says that, she sent it 2 weeks ago. And they might say, yes, the turnaround time to actually get that posted on our website is 4 weeks. So then you're able to relax a little bit, but make sure to check back 2 weeks later to make sure that they have received it.
We do keep a documentation log of every form that we send out. So for your peace of mind, if you have a question about whether it's been sent or not, I can't tell you what they sent.
And with the counselor, the school report form, if any of your students are applying through the Common App, which the Common App is a website where institutions become members of the Common App, and the student is able to fill out one application, but it gets sent to multiple schools. Sounds really great, but very often schools also have a supplement that they ask students to fill out. So it's like, yes, it's so easy for you to do this, but fill this out also. There is a counselor report form on the Common App, and so if your student's applying to 5 Common App schools, they only need to print out one of the counselor recommendation forms, sign off on it, and then just tell your counselor which 5 schools that's going to. We'll make photocopies of that for you. You don't need to come in with, with all of those. Yes?
One thing I saw when I was looking at the Common App is that it says, if you're going to do stuff online, do it all online. If you're going to do it by paper, do it all by paper. So how do y'all do those online?
Well, I think they were speaking to the student
Yeah.
on that, right?
Right.
So what happened, so when my first student this school year applied to the Common App or filled out the Common App, she put my email address down as the counselor. I got an email that prompted me to make a decision. Am I going to be submitting all of my paperwork for all of my students by paper, or am I doing that online? I selected paper because I'm mailing in a transcript anyways, so I'm going to mail my things in by paper. I checked that, and then any student who put down my email address from that point on would receive an email back that says, your school counselor is elected to use paper forms. You need to print out the school report and give it to your counselor.
Okay.
And counselors do that differently. So I know I'm a paper review, and
I do online.
he does online. For me, I like the part. I like it. I like holding on to it. So I just
They don't care about that.
They don't care, which not
They want that direction of do one all on and what they don't want you to print out the supplement, mail that in, but then do the application online because them connecting on their end is tricky.
Okay.
That's a great question.
Regarding the Common App, I'm thinking about what the person said in the first session about how you oftentimes want a custom tailor. Is that what the supplement typically allows for?
Right.
Okay.
All right, teacher recommendations. We do encourage students to have at least 3 adults that can write a positive recommendation that speaks of their abilities, attributes, skills, expertise that they're going to take to the college campus. Very often we get questions like, and please bear with me, things like, my girlfriend's mom wants to write a recommendation. I'm sure your girlfriend's mom can write a really good recommendation. That's not a good representation of you actually.
Or not.
Or not, I don't know. But we do get those questions, and it's nothing to detract from those people who can offer those positive regards about you. Those people are not who the admissions officer wants to hear from. They want to hear from the teachers, or the educational, or the principals, or the counselors, people who can speak to your abilities, how your work ethic, the willingness to put yourself out there, to think critically about things. The other stuff is nice. It's a good attribute, but it's not what's going to contribute to your student getting into We ask you, think about teachers in a critical way. If you are thinking about a teacher from your 8th grade year, your algebra teacher, and let's say that your student was a great algebra teacher, just absolutely rocked out in algebra, they haven't heard from them since then, that's not good representation. But if you have a junior class where they were in AP biology and it was a class, maybe they didn't get an A, maybe they got a B in it, but they worked really hard and they showed a lot of dedication and they put themselves out there and they exposed themselves to new material, new challenges that they had never seen before. That might be a good representation of your students' abilities. That might be what the college admissions officer needs to hear to see that your student's willing to put in that extra effort. So we do encourage you, think very critically about who you're going to ask. Other people that can be used are coaches. Sometimes bosses, although you got to be aware of how knowledgeable your boss is of anything beyond your work hours. Same thing with the coach. If you have a volunteer coordinator who can speak to things you've done outside of school, those are also good people. Counselors write recommendation letters as well. Many of us will write them as a function of just doing the sending off the secondary school work. But if it's a school like JMU, which only takes one recommendation letter, and it has to be with the transcript, and you have an English teacher from your 11th grade year, but you really want that one to be included, have that conversation with the council. We're not going to be offended. We ultimately want you to get off to the best start in college as possible, so we are certainly not going to stand in the way of that. If you have someone that you want to write that recommendation letter for you that you already know, that you've thought about, by all means, have that person write it. Give them as much time as you can. If your student has not thought about this already, they should think about it so that by this time next week, they can ask them. Teachers will get bombarded. The AP English and Honors English 11 teachers get asked a ton. They will get asked for between, like one of them quoted last year, they got 47 requests. That's almost a caseload of seniors for the counseling office. That's a lot of letters to write, plus they're teaching, plus they're writing their own curriculum. So I encourage you to ask them now, give them plenty of time, because at certain points, some teachers will say, I'm not writing any more red letters. You'll have to find somebody else. And if you've waited to that point, then it's just a bad situation for the kid.
Couple more things about teacher letters of recommendation. You know, if your student is fortunate enough and has worked so hard that he has almost straight A's and a couple of B's, that B teacher might be the perfect person to write a letter of recommendation. Colleges don't really need to hear from the teacher of the A, right? So they know that you did really well in that teacher's class, you got an A. But if you worked really hard for a B, and maybe that teacher only gives out 2 A's every school year, and they're able to reference that in your letter, this student worked so hard, these are examples of what they did, how to progress over the school year. No, they didn't get an A, I only give out a few each year, but he demonstrated these qualities. So it might be a good idea to pick that person to write a letter of recommendation. With teacher letters, as Mr. Southwell said, you want to follow directions. So if the school only asks for 1 letter and says they're only going to read 1 letter, you only want to send 1 letter. Sometimes we think, you know, the more we send, the better. Sometimes colleges will only read the first one that they get. And so if you know, even if you don't see these letters, you kind of know which letter might be a really quality letter. You want to make sure that letter gets read, as opposed to, you know, the 2nd or the 3rd letter that you might have just thrown in, you know, for extra.
Personal essays. Many of the applications in Virginia do have personal essays. These are sometimes prompts that will give you specific topics to write about. Sometimes they'll just say, give us a writing sample, something that represents you. We do encourage students, think long and hard, be very critical about what you write. Make sure you proofread. I know that should go without saying, however, we do have students who try to send things that don't proofread. Have a counselor or an English teacher read them. Many of the English classes, all of our dual enrollment and all of our AP English classes are writing essays for their classes as a matter of assignment. So this is a great time to look at your applications, find out if there's a prompt that you need to be writing about, and then write for the assignment what you're going to turn in for the college. You get a lot of critical review. It's a great way to get that process started, and maybe if you haven't started the application, at least know what's going to be asked as far as recommendation letters, or essays are required.
Oh, I remember what it was. With the teacher letter recommendation, it's just important. Students always sometimes get confused. They think that those evaluation forms that they turned in, you know, for the counselor for their letter is the same thing as a letter of recommendation. It can be from the same teacher, not a problem at all, but it's not one and the same.
Last thing, college application deadlines are the responsibility of the student. We won't track them down. You shouldn't have to Students will tell us they're applying to a school, and then come deadline time, they haven't gotten us the materials. We go on the assumption that they change their mind. Okay? If they're having trouble with deadlines now, college is going to be very tough. So this is a chance for your students to take responsibility for this step in their life. Push them, by all means. Many of them will procrastinate. Many of them will get nervous. Many of them will fight it for whatever reason. They'll drag their feet. That's normal and natural. And you'll get frustrated by it, as will we. You keep pushing, doing the right thing. Students need that push. They can take responsibility for themselves. They've done it for years and years. This is one more step in their education that they can handle. But this is their step.
And that goes also to calling admissions offices if there are questions. Students are going through applications and they come to question 17 and they're confused. They don't understand what they're asking. So they'll sit there and they'll fret over it for an hour or two. And then finally they'll go to their school counselor and then they'll fret over it there. Pick up the phone. That is what the admissions office representatives are there for. They want your $50 application fee. They want you to not be frustrated and hit submit. They want you to do that. So they know their application better than anybody. And so calling the admissions offices and asking those questions. And please make sure that your student is the one calling the admissions office and asking those questions. He or she does not have to give their name. They're not saying, I'm applicant number, just, I'm filling out your application and I had a question. So please, anytime, and I'll make the student call, I'm right there with them. Sometimes I'm scribbling notes to them as they're talking on the phone, but that is so important for them to really own that process. So these are some websites for scholarships and financial aid. Mr. Sabo and I attended a session at UVA, and, oh wait, 1 minute, okay. And these were some bullets that one of the deans at UVA said. Think small, look wide, be patient, it's hard work, starting early and taking time to understand. All of this screams patience, I think, but also knowing that this is your student's process. The student coming to the school counseling office and asking, are there any scholarships? We're absolutely going to talk to you about that, but it's the legwork is on the student to find those scholarships. We will post any scholarships that we hear about on our website. Mr. Southall is our scholarship kind of guru when it comes to that. And then these websites, FastWeb and scholarships.com, are two websites that the student fills out a profile and then they get bombarded with emails in regard to possible scholarships to apply to. That goes to the admissions rep, which you referenced, creating a college-specific email address. I think that's a great idea so that they can only log into that email when they really have time to wade through some of that they're going to get from some of the scholarship organizations. And then
The really important thing on this slide, FAFSA. FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. This is the federal government's gateway keeping measure for financial aid. It cannot be done until January 1st, 2013, and it's based on your tax information for this calendar year. This one time will be a little invasive and encourage you need to get your taxes done as soon as possible because they will ask tax-specific information so that when you fill it out, you have that information. If you guess, if you estimate, and you're wrong, it will hold it up. And it can hold it up for a long time. It can be kind of a pain. What more of a pain to fix an error than to actually do the application the first time around. So we encourage you be very thorough with that. If you're nervous, if that process makes you a little tentative, the counselors are glad to help. We are not financial planners. We don't claim to be. So if you ask us something like how do I rearrange my financial assets, we're not going to answer that question. That's a financial situation for the family. But we are happy to help fill out the actual application.
And when you reference free, the reason is there is a FAFSA.com that wants to charge you $25 or so to fill out this free application. So just make sure that you're going to the e.gov. There is also a FAFSA forecaster that you could go on to now on FAFSA's website to be able to estimate what your predicted family contribution is going to be based on, if your tax information hasn't changed drastically. You could go ahead on and do that now to be able to see what will most likely come back as your estimated expected family contribution.
We are going to have a financial aid night in January. It's usually the third week of January. That date hasn't been set. We're kind of working around some athletic events and trying to make sure we hit the most parents as possible in a setting that doesn't involve the basketball game taking over half our parking lot.
So that's all that we have. The next